Welcome to Going the Distance with Go Long. I am Jill Consor Beck, and Go Long is a coaching service that focuses on accountability coaching via text. So when you're too busy to have that meeting to go meet with someone and you just need those gentle nudges throughout your week to keep you on track, that is where Go Long comes in. Today, I am here with Nicole Lenzen, who is a coach for both like mid-career executives, and she specializes in career transitions and leadership development and parental leave. And parental leave is definitely something that is a passion of hers. Her approach blends inner work, visioning, tactical planning, and just mindfulness so that you can figure out how you can show up best for yourself. She has 20 plus years in leadership consulting and coaching, but she's going to get into more of how she got here and what her journey is. So, Nicole, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jill. I'm excited to be here.
So how'd you get here?
Yeah.
You've been on this road. You've been on this windy road. We've known each other for a long time, but how you've gotten on this wrong?
Yeah, it certainly hasn't been a linear track. I've definitely spent, I don't know, my life exploring lots of different things. And I've also like a theme underneath, which I'll probably dig into more today. It's just that I've been kind of going on my own through all of this. Like I've always been, super independent. And if I make a decision, it's mine. And I've changed careers a million times. And throughout, I've definitely been trying to cram my square peg into the round hole. And that's, manifested in so many different environments, like male dominated industries, or just being internally this hyperachiever, definitely being a workaholic. And eventually my body just said, okay, enough is enough. Like you and many of your listeners, I developed a life-changing autoimmune disease when I was in my late 30s. Not that that time frame is the same for everybody, but mine, in my case, it was type 1 diabetes, which is typically juvenile onset. And it is, genetic. However, I also fully believe that it was triggered at that age by chronic stress. And that diagnosis really forced me to just shift how I see everything, whether that's like, strength as a quality or control over my circumstances or success. And at that point, I had, until that point, I had not considered becoming a mom or having kids. I was just always career oriented. And then it was really through that diagnosis that I chose to become a mom, and a solo mom specifically. I just wanted more reward. I didn't want to be addicted to my ambition anymore. And that choice, led me to incredible joy. I have a wonderful 3.5-year-old daughter now. And it also just made me realize like how much throughout my life I've been equating independence and just going it alone with self-worth. And then as I continued on my journey, when I later lost a leadership role after returning from maternity leave, it really hit me. I was like, I'm still kind of trying to tie my identity to my work and my self-sufficiency. And I just really saw like so many other women doing the same thing, just trying to hold it all together, because that's what we're taught, like strength is really all about. But ultimately, like, it's exhausting and unsustainable, and it's making us sick. And so at that point, I decided to become a coach, and just said, there were so many moments in my life and career that I wish I had had better support to get through these huge transitions. And so that's what I focus on now. I help people get really intentional about what they want, to build support systems, to peel back those layers of identity that like no longer serve them, so that they can get to their true selves.
So much to unpack there. And yeah, I mean, it's a very compelling journey. Obviously, I can relate on the autoimmune piece. And I think that, not getting support that you wish you would have had at certain key components, kind of tying independence with money and ambition and what that all means. Because obviously you do need money, right? Like you do need it on some level to function and provide for. But it's also like, where is that balance between having enough money to feel like you have agency versus just being a slave to it all? So I guess I want to start with like, I have a bunch of cousins who have type 1 diabetes, and I have my own autoimmune stuff. I don't have type 1 diabetes, but type 1 diabetes is a very drastic life shift in terms of how you have to monitor things in a way that's different than what I see with a lot of other autoimmune disease. Not that it's a competition, but type 1, you're like all of a sudden there's lots of things that you have to check on a regular basis. So maybe you could talk about how you were dealing with that while you were still like in corporate.
Yeah, it was a massive shock. I could share a little bit about how I actually found out I had the condition, because that was kind of nuts. I was actually, working a very intense consulting job at the time, which I did really enjoy, but it was sort of the icing on the cake in terms of just like how much my body could handle. And I was in Europe traveling. I was the team lead. We were working on a project with a client there, and I was our driver. So I was driving us around the Alps, and so to speak, to get to our meetings. And it was like really hot, and we were in a conference room. We were about to like do some kind of kickoff or share out or something. And the projection looked blurry. And I was like, oh, can you change the settings? And it's blurry. And they were like, no, it's not. And I was like, oh, weird. Okay. So then I kind of just like put it to the side, but then I looked at my laptop screen instead because I could focus on that. And so that was a little worrisome, but like my classic response was like, oh, it's a heat wave. Like, right. All these other factors that are influencing this. It's nothing. And then I was like, I was the one who was driving us around, and it was like kind of terrifying because we were driving a manual. Nobody else could drive a manual. And so it was like, I kind of had that obligation. I'm like, it's cool. Just help me out with the signage. Like, and then we like had to go to Germany. And then I went to a optician, not an ophthalmologist. And they're like, yeah, your vision's definitely off. And I'd always had 20/20 vision. They're like, it is pretty weird that, you would lose it all of a sudden. You should definitely get it checked out. But then it was like, of course I had all this travel still going, and I didn't, it wasn't until I got back home. And then I didn't even go to the doctor right away because I had another trip planned. I went to get glasses and contacts because it was like this Band-Aid patch. And, it was just like this series of things. And then I started like I just like would lose all my energy. Like I could barely function. And then my brain started just like acting really strange, or like everything that came out of my mouth was this jumbled mess. It was not what like the clear articulated thoughts in my brain. And I didn't always notice, and people would look at me really weird, and my energy levels were all over the place. And of course I had to pee all the time. And it was like, It was just, and then I was in this process of moving back across the country. And so everything else kept getting prioritized except for me. And so it just took and then I got staffed on this other crazy project, and I was just like, all right, let's hit the ground running. And, and at that point it was kind of dangerous because it was like, not having controlled diabetes is really bad. And so I had visited a doctor who was not an endocrinologist and gotten the idea, like my A1C was out the roof, which is the measure of your blood sugar over the last 3 months. So we had a strong sense that I had diabetes. But it took a while before I was able to actually get diagnosed and start insulin and get on a regimen. And I was still working. And then I was like managing it, quote unquote, managing in real time, but not well. And then I ended up having to travel again and have these really scary highs and lows. And at that point I just said, what are you doing? You got to take a leave. Like, this is your life. Like, this is your health. Like, this is your actual life. Like, whether you're going to stay alive. And it was at that point when I took a leave that I really just prioritized working with I call it like my Western medicine doctor, like got a good endocrinologist. I got on track with medication, somebody who really cared about, he spent like 2 hours with me in my first session, which was really, and just really left a strong impression. Like, he really cared, and he showed up many other times in my life, which I can share later, but in funny ways, but stayed my endocrinologist for a long time. And then I decided that I would then address the Eastern medicine side of it, because I felt like chronic stress had played a huge part in the onset of this. And I spent a month in India at a program on an ashram specifically focused on healing from chronic illness. And so I was in company with people with all different kinds of conditions, and we learned breathing, chanting, traditional yogic practices, and a lot of the science behind how stress prevents us from activating our parasympathetic nervous system, prevents us from having those moments of calm and rest and recovery that we really need, that are so critical. And that I had been living in this, heightened nervous state system for so long. And so it was the combination of those like two things that really set me on a path. And I stayed on leave for a while, but I actually ultimately decided not to go back to that role because it was just too much. And I didn't have the support at the organization that I needed in order to do that. And it still took me a while to like fully learn the lesson and figure out what I needed, but it was not easy.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. All right. Where to go from there? So many places. So when you're sitting there and you're getting this diagnosis and you're thinking like, okay, I have to like change. Like for me, I had my rheumatoid arthritis diagnosis, and I got it in like my mid to late 20s back in the late 1990s when no one talked about autoimmune. And I did not manage it well at all. I felt like I could outrun it. I can charge through it. Like I've been able to like push through anything. I'm going to push through this. That was a mistake. And then like one day I just decided, it was probably about 5 years in, that like there has to be a better way than waking up stiff for 45 minutes on being on meds, right? So maybe you could talk about like what that rock bottom point was for you in that journey where you're like, fuck, like there's just got to be a better way than what this is.
Yeah, it was definitely a series of moments. And I will say a distinctly memorable time period was in the wake of the diagnosis, just the depression that kind of took over as well as the physical impact, because it wasn't like, oh, woe is me, I now have this disease. It was like tied to that independence piece that I led with at the beginning. I felt like I now have to rely on medicine, healthcare companies, drug companies, insurance companies to stay alive. There's nothing I can do on my own. My pancreas is not working any longer. And thank God we have all this medicine that can help me and keep me alive. The lifespan for type 1 diabetics back when was very short.
Yeah.
And also you were not advised to have a child. I got diagnosed, before I had a child. There's a lot of risk associated with that, but I was able to find the support and effective, get through that well.
Mm-hmm.
And I and my child and I are healthy throughout and still are. But it was really just that feeling of a complete shattering of identity that was so rooted in sort of going in my own way and being independent. So that I'll just share that. I don't know if there was like one moment within that felt rock bottom. It was just sort of like a theme for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think in terms of just like that moment when I was traveling and realized that I had to take a leave. I mean, it was basically one of the situations where when you're really low, then your brain stops working. I mean, effectively what insulin does is it converts our food into energy, into glucose that can be absorbed into our cells so they function, which is all of our cells, like whether it's our, different organs, our brain. And so they're impacted in different ways when you go high and low. But when you're low, you basically you can black out, you can go into a diabetic coma if you don't eat sugar. And then, so it can be fatal. And it can also just be scary when you're going low because you stop being able to, your body's trying to conserve energy in every way that it can. So and also you just don't have the sugar to actually be absorbed by your cells and be used for energy. So, you just basically stop feeling human at that stage. So those intermix with incredible highs where at that stage, it just made me feel super lethargic and want to just pass out. I had no energy. I just felt completely sick. And those are the ones that over time can be really debilitating in terms of other conditions. But at the time, it was just fluctuating between these two really foreign and unknown states that were so removed from me. And it was just scary. It was scary not having that control over how I was showing up.
But through all that, it was kind of like a phoenix rising through the ashes. You decided to become a mom.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You decided to, go upon that journey and be like, you know what? I don't care. This is now what's calling to me. You write a Substack called Layer by Layer, right? So maybe you can tie in a little bit of, all right, you had to figure out the type 1 diabetes, the career, what that was going to look like. And then, you got a little one. You decided to go upon that. So obviously, layer by layer, has a lot of symbolism for you. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that journey also.
Yeah, absolutely. These are great questions. So, yeah, I think, when I think about layers, especially of identity, like I think about all of the ones that we carry, some of them intentionally, some of them not. So they can be, like in this case, they can be health related, like chronic illness. They can be cultural, ethnic, socioeconomic. They can be gender, sexual orientation related, professional, personal, all the things. And so as we accumulate these life experiences, we add layers and layers and layers on top of who we are. And some of these are they're gifts, right? They're amazing experiences. They make us smarter, stronger, whatever. And then some of them are more like armor. They're what we wear to kind of like blend in or to advance or to protect ourselves, and kind of carrying through with the metaphor. Like I like to think about it as an artichoke. So these tough outer layers that we wear are what people often like are greeted with, and they're often necessary or feel necessary, but they're not the whole truth. And so those layers might help us to survive or succeed, but they also can often conceal and keep us like from being fully seen, or even seeing ourselves. And so it's like this, when we start peeling back these outer layers, then we get closer to like the heart and the nourishing part of who we are and what's really been there all along. But because we've had to show up in a corporate society or like with a family that doesn't accept who we are, or like all of these different scenarios that we might face, or like a company that will give you reasonable accommodation, but not necessarily want to see the impact of you being sick or like whatever, then we get disconnected from our truest selves, and we start like making decisions from that. We're basically lost. Like we're sort of like disoriented. And it's normal. It's a path that most of us go on. And I think there was a moment though when I got sick that I started shedding those outer layers, because I realized, like, yes, like you said, money's important, ambition, like some of that stuff is, can serve us. But I also realized like how much I was living those layers, like, and existing in that way, and how much it was preventing me from actually like tapping into my truest self, who basically was intended to be a loving person, a loving mom. And I just like never actually accessed that feeling before, or like accepted that was another path for me.
I mean, I have clients who definitely struggle with the fact that they really want to do like meaningful work, in tech, right? And meaningful doesn't necessarily mean like, saving the world type of thing, but they want to build like really cool products that people are going to use and all that. And they work in some intense environments, right? Companies that are very well known, and they struggle because they're like, am I a terrible person because I want to like really, like build amazing things, and I want to show to my kids that they can do whatever they want. But then they're also like, if I'm missing school drop off, does that make me a terrible person? You know what I mean? These I think are just these, constant struggles that women in particular have around, where they're at. And then put on top of that, you layer on top of that the fact that you're a single parent. So you're not even like co-parenting with someone where, you can like share the load, right? So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you see that, from like the clients that you work with, your own experience, and what that looks like.
Yeah. So first off, I'll just say that I was never planned, but I actually moved close to where my parents lived because they showed up, and they were willing and more than happy to support. My daughter had a really hard time at daycare off the bat. It was not a good fit. My job was super intense, and then I got let go. Like there were just a ton of factors that, and then I decided to go pursue a coaching certification, start a new career. There were a lot of factors like influencing where I was in that place. And through that, priorities shifted. And I also recognized that, like, back to the independence theme, that like I didn't have to do it alone. It was like being a solo mom. And sure, I'm very lucky, like that my parents are relatively young and fit, and we have shared values, and it's awesome that they are willing. I mean, they're taking care of my daughter right now because preschool lets out at 2:45, right? So
right.
They are able to lean in, and it's a beautiful thing. And I realize that not everybody has that, but in terms of just like the transition from being like totally solo and like seeking out that independence to actually like asking for, accepting, being okay with help. Like I'm still on that journey. Like it is not easy. I will tell you that, but it has been kind of fantastic just seeing how other people are willing and able to step in, even if it's not your parents, if it's somebody else in your life. And I've actually met, a ton of other solo moms by choice, and everybody's, always willing to help lean in for each other. And so you just build community, you find different ways of existing. I think I might have veered off your original question, but I did just want to like set the record that I'm
I think that's good.
Not living all alone and like have no one else to turn to.
No, but I mean, it's still, I think it's still a challenge, right? Where in terms of coordination, I mean, it's great that your parents are there and that they're able to do that, but it's still a challenge.
Yeah, no, don't get me wrong. It's hard for any parent, I think, but yeah, definitely in terms of just being the primary caregiver and all of the elements that go into parenting and not having, somebody to carry that weight in an equal way. It's certainly not easy. And I think back to like what you were talking about in terms of work, we're really at a very difficult place, especially in the US, in terms of not having, I just talked to my insurance agent about, healthcare.
Oh God.
Rates for next year. And it's like all the things. Right. And so it's just when it comes to like healthcare, when it comes to childcare, when it comes to really anything having to do with parenting, it's just, we're not set up for success. I mean, we look at any other country, like, and the systems are just better. The systems are there because you're valued. Parenting is valued, education is valued, child development is valued, and gender equity is valued. Not equally everywhere, but we're pretty bottom of the barrel at this point in this country. And as a result, it's like corporates either have to sort of fill in the slack and provide some of these benefits and accommodations and flexibility. They don't have to, but they can. But then, then there's just a ton of factors as to why they don't go that route, or they don't do it in a way that actually feels helpful.
Yeah, I mean, we can have a whole discussion about our healthcare system. Our insurance premiums next year, $500 a month going up, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely.
And it's like, I'm a solopreneur, my husband's contracting, so it's not like we're sitting around doing nothing. But it's, it's absolutely insane. But that we can have a whole discussion on the inadequacies of our healthcare system. I think that the other thing you touched upon when you were going through your story is around, your trip to India. And I always say managing autoimmune is a combination of art and science, right? So if you think about like Western medicine versus Eastern medicine, right? And let's say Western medicine is more science and Eastern medicine is more art, for argument's sake. And that's a huge generalization. I'm willing to acknowledge that. But I think that you have to be in tune with your body and what works. And one of the things I learned early on in my autoimmune disease, way before, when I was still hardcore in corporate, is that you're going to have to quarterback your own healthcare. Like, even if you have that great endocrinologist, when you decided to have your daughter, that's like you're figuring out, like, there's the OBGYN obviously, but then it's like, do you have to go because of like the stress on your kidneys, because of, what happens with diabetes and everything else, and what does that do? Like, you have to see a nephrologist, like, who knows? Like, and you don't need to disclose that. It isn't just a simple thing to have a child while you have autoimmune, particularly something like type 1, right? I'm sure it was very complicated to kind of triangulate all those disparate medical professionals.
Absolutely. Oh, it's insanely complicated. I think some people would just choose not to do it because there's a lot of risk, and it's very, it's so hands-on and it shifts. Even not being pregnant every day as a female with, a menstrual cycle, every single day is different because my insulin resistance, my blood sugar levels are so impacted by my hormones. And then, talk about pregnancy and breastfeeding. Talk about the most intense hormonal changes you could ever face. And usually the advice, I mean, I had an amazing maternal fetal medicine, like high risk OBGYN team, an amazing endocrinologist and PA who was just like on it with me, a nutritionist, like lots and lots. And then, you know, I did labs like every week practically. Like it was, wow. I was very well handheld. And I mean, the third trimester I was going like twice a week for, you know, tests and sonograms and stuff. And it was very hands-on. And so I feel really taken care of in that sense. And even on the fertility journey, like that was also just intense too, because you've got all the hormones that you're injecting and all of the things that you're monitoring. And so together, like they're difficult journeys on their own, but then together they're even harder. And it's not like, consistency that you're just seeing like the same thing day to day to day. But again, like the support was huge. There was a lot of advocacy and a lot of like research and education and things that I needed to do on my own. But then I also was able to find, part of that was, I think, being in New York City with a bunch of, you know, very reputable professionals in the medical field. It's not easy. It required so much diligence. I mean, I had to keep my blood sugar within a range like a person that doesn't have diabetes because of the risk on me and the child. So that I just had to basically be in proactive and reactive mode the whole time. Then it got really scary. Like they care so much about the baby's health. It's not that they don't care about the mom's health, but it's just like secondary. And so it was like the whole time, it's like all of the instructions that you're getting are like all about keeping the baby alive and then having a healthy baby. But then like, once you have the baby, you kind of fall off. And so nobody really gave me the level of detail that I needed to know in terms of like the insulin requirement drop when you have the baby and you start breastfeeding. And it was like, I was definitely like, I almost went into a coma like multiple times because it was just like so drastically different. And that was the time, that was like just something I noticed in terms of, you know, how you're treated.
On that journey, right? You have so much like weight that you're carrying, like emotional weight, the stress. And when you're problem solving, right? And I think you talked about the artichoke. I call it like there's peeling the onion. Yeah. When you're starting to figure out like, okay, you have type 1 diabetes. So obviously that's a problem. And obviously you have to solve that problem in terms of getting that under control. But then as you start examining like your relationship with things to kind of deal with the type 1 diabetes, it kind of uncovers, you know, all of these other things. And where I'm going with this is that a lot of what I deal with people is mental clutter, right? Yeah. A lot of mental clutter, and how much that mental clutter is really holding them back from doing the hard things. Because the mental clutter, and you're just conditioned, and like, you know, you lived in New York for a while. When I met you, you were in California, right? That's right. You know, living in New York as someone who is a native New Yorker who's now lived in Seattle almost 23 years, which blows my freaking mind, right? You don't realize there's another way to live.
Yeah.
There are people out here in Seattle who definitely live in terms of just like the work. The work just like overtakes them, and in the Bay Area too. So it's not like, but there's just a grind that you just think like, this is the only way to live. And you don't realize that there's another path that can be chosen if you want to. So maybe I'd love to hear like someone who's just like overwhelmed. How do you advise them?
Yeah. So I'm trained in integral coaching, which is rooted in, it's basically understanding the 3 intelligence centers. So head, heart, and body. And realizing like is our relationship with each of these? How much do we pay attention to what these centers are telling us? And how can we more fully integrate information from all of them in order to declutter, to prioritize, to find fulfillment, to do all the things? And so what that can look like for a lot of people is they're living in this mental spin all the time. This is just an example. So they're just like, you know, they're running scenarios in their head. They're thinking through worst case scenarios. They're just like catastrophizing. And it's, you know, there's emotion there because there's usually fear, but it's just like they are not paying probably any attention to their somatic, the body response, which can usually give them a lot of information. So they may be running these like shoulds, like this is the way I have to live, or this is what I was meant to do, or if I don't do this, I'm a failure, or I have to keep climbing the ladder, or whatever the message or the narratives are. But then they're not necessarily like paying attention to the feeling that takes over them when they're in a moment that is very counter to and misaligned with who they actually are and what can bring them joy and what can create peace for them. And so that could be like, a high degree of stress or a high degree of anxiety or just like disappointment or sadness or like all of these things that could take over from an emotional perspective and then manifest in the body in some way, whether it's like attention or rigidity or that can show up. And so that's just one example of a way that somebody might be living and that is non-integrated and non-balanced. And once you start paying a lot more attention to what's really going on throughout your body, your heart, and your mind, then you can start becoming a lot more in touch with what really resonates and what doesn't. And sure, like and then there's also tied to that, just like, what are these like limiting beliefs that we might have, that we have been conditioned to believe certain things, whether that's due to our childhood upbringing and having to act in a certain way or feeling like we need to protect a part of us, which are really just survival mechanisms. And they're not usually rooted in like real danger, but really kind of digging and understanding like what's underneath all of this clutter, all of the spin, all of the spiraling, all of the like things that we're trying to consider and can't parse through and prioritize and make sense of because we're not in tune with who we really are, what's important.
You said two words there that struck with me, which I wrote down while you were talking. Should and disappoint. And I feel like women are guided, whether they want to admit it or not, by should and disappoint. I should be doing this. I should be doing kid drop off. If I don't do this, I'm going to disappoint this person. Like, there's just so much of that right now, I feel like, for women in the workplace. And there was some article, which I'm not going to say where it was published, but it got a lot of press over the weekend. And it was totally about, it was women in the workplace and like taking shots of women in the workplace. And I'm not even going to read it because I don't want to give it the clicks.
Yep.
Because it was just so bad. Just like everything I heard about it was just, and the premise of it to me was just like complete like bullshit. But when you talked about like, we don't have the systems in place, like the US is pretty low down. What do you like, in terms of like tactically, you're working with a client who's like feeling all these things. Is there something tactically that you get your clients to do to kind of just start that process, to kind of start that reflection?
Yeah. I mean, it does depend on the client. Not everybody's
right.
the same. Everybody's operating from a different place. It has different levels of awareness, right? And also different willingness and abilities to like actually peel back those layers and go deeper from the start. I think though, it's a really common statement that like, awareness is step one, right?
Right.
If we don't have awareness into how we're behaving, what we believe, what the stories are that we tell ourselves, like how we're showing up, how we're feeling, then there's no way that we can identify the why. Why are these things the case? And how can we start shifting them? And so ultimately it is, whether it's in session or whether it's doing a set of reflections or whether it's, just a simple practice that they integrate into their day, it's really about understanding, how am I showing up? Because a lot of times we even have stories about how we're showing up. And so until we start actually noting what's going on, then we can start opening the door to, like I said, like better understanding why and how we can shift.
I feel like one of the things I didn't realize for a good chunk of my 40s is that Fridays was my worst day at work. Now, meanwhile, like Friday, I'm like excited, the weekend's here, blah, 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 blah. By Friday, I was like, I give zero fucks. And the filter, I mean, not that I have much of a filter, but like there was like by Friday, it was just gone. I was still working in corporate. I realized, I'm like, yeah, why is it that Fridays I tend to like step in the biggest piles of like shit all the time, right? And at that point, when I was in like my late 40s, no one was really talking too much about perimenopause at that point, right? And so you don't like, I didn't realize like all this stuff that like my body was going through that like I didn't really know and blah, blah, because most of the time at that point, menopause is like you turn 50, your periods stop and you have hot flashes. Like that's it, right? And now,
yeah,
like
exactly.
even in this like short time, in this like 5-6 year window, there's so much more we know about it now, including the fact that you start to have symptoms a lot earlier than the age of 50 that can like impact all of these things. And I do think that it's like noticing those patterns, because once I realized that, I actually talked to a former boss of mine, I don't know, like 2 or 3 years after I made that realization. He's like, oh my God. He's like, that is true that like on Fridays, that was not a good day for you for whatever reason. He's like, at the beginning of the week, you were just like, damn, but you were just so burnt out by Friday.
Huh.
It really was helpful for me to kind of figure that out and understand. And when I work with clients now, I'm also like, how much buffer time are you putting in between your meetings? Because if you're going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, your brain is just like not having a chance to kind of process what happened. And thank God now for meeting note takers. Holy shit.
I know.
Like, that is like such a game changer for me. But it just is that you're just going from one thing to the other. And how are you not caring? Like, let's say you had a meeting that was really contentious, and then you're going into the next meeting. How are you not carrying that? Of course you're carrying that into the next meeting. So that's just like making things even worse. So I do think it's like understanding, like you have to be willing to take that step back and just be like, what is happening here? Like, I don't understand.
Exactly. And one of the things I do have a lot of clients do is an activity journal, where literally it's documentation of all of the different things that you've done throughout the day. And it can include personal stuff too. And then noting what your engagement was, or like what your energy levels were, and what qualities you brought to the table, and then kind of digging deeper as to like why that was unpleasant, or why it was enjoyable, or why you felt like you were really showing up in a good way. And then you can start seeing those patterns, because it's like not only throughout the course of a day, but it's throughout a course of a week or a month. And you start seeing, okay, well, I just generally across the board don't do well unless I like right before lunch, because I'm just starving and I'm getting really irritable. Or like this particular type of meeting, like I know that I need some downtime after, because if I rush into something right away, then like you said, it's still going to be lingering, and I need that space to walk it off or whatever. Or, you just start understanding like where you thrive and where you really struggle. And then you can start making the shifts that are just better suited to you.
What are you also seeing with like your clients right now? What trends are you seeing?
I mean, there's a couple different camps of folks that I work with. I really enjoy working with women who are on a leadership trajectory. They're not necessarily already at executive level, but they are, climbing and taking on more responsibility. And I think I've just seen that like executive coaching in companies has been around for a long time. Usually there's some kind of entry level training, and usually, when you're early in your career, you're more willing to, it's just easier to make friends and build community and find natural mentors. But in that middle ground, like maybe you are starting a family, or you've got chronic illness, you've got these other things coming in, but like, it doesn't mean that you necessarily want to sacrifice your career. You may just want a different relationship with it, but then there's no support in the workplace. Like usually people's managers, are not necessarily caring about their growth. They are really struggling to communicate and influence. They're often like, because of these layers that we've built up, they're like not connected to their own needs and wants, and they have a really hard time advocating for themselves. And so I'm seeing a lot of folks who need to just step more into their own, and whether that's like pushing back, like you talked about, that people pleasing tendency or the should tendency, to say like, actually, I don't need to take this 7 p.m. call. I can set a boundary here. This is not urgent. This is not urgent. Or, that can look in so many different ways. Or it's like, you know what? I want to push for a professional development budget so that I can work with a coach and feel like it is directly tied to my impact at work. And the other piece, like you said, around burnout is just like the well-being factor. Like, I think everybody is just so fried, and everything is so uncertain because of the economy, because of the administration, because of everything, that folks are kind of freaking out. And so a lot of people, like, I just don't think handle uncertainty or ambiguity really well, especially when it has super high stakes like it is right now. And so I think with a lot of people, it's like really getting down to like what's important. So if work is just consuming everything, but then there's really no security attached to it, then it's like, well, how can we actually just get down to the priorities? What's going to show that you're delivering impact at work, and where can you step back, and where can you take care of yourself, or where can you integrate these even micro moments? I talk a lot about micro moments because it's like you said, back-to-back meetings, like that doesn't serve anybody. You're not getting activity, you're not giving your brain a rest, you're not having any downtime, you're probably not eating well, like you're not taking care of your other needs. Work just becomes like the sole thing that drives your every minute.
Yeah, the micro moments. I mean, literally my service is called micro accountability, because it's literally those moments where it's like, okay, why am I eating potato chips at 4:00? And I'm not trying to food shame anybody, but then they're like feeling terrible about it. It's like, well, did you eat breakfast or lunch?
Yeah.
Maybe. And so then it's like, okay, all right, like, how about we try something a little bit different? Why don't we try, like, if you don't like eat it, if, like, let's say, try some yogurt, man, like first thing in the morning, just to see how that goes, see if that like stabilizes you, and trying to just get to the root of what's actually happening, because it is those little micro moments where you're not doing yourself any favors. You're like, I think it's also getting out of the mindset of like, I'm going to power through. And if that means I power through and I don't eat lunch, cool. And it's like, no, actually, that's not cool. And for you, that can have very dire consequences. But let's leave that out. Like, that's not good. Your body doesn't react to that, right? And that's what also causes that inflammation, which causes all these other things that, concatenate, whether it's autoimmune or something else. You're not doing yourself any favors by just trying to power through it. It's not doing what you think it is. For my clients and I'm sure you have this if you have tech clients, where they have calls at all hours of the day, because they have calls, with Europe, and they got
different time zones, and it's a nightmare.
And I tell people, I'm like, look, okay, how about you just try and limit those calls to like once or twice a week, right? And just be like, if that's the reality that you have to communicate with XYZ market in Asia, right? Then just do that once or twice a week. You don't have to make it an every night thing. Like, that's just not good for you. And yeah, that might like impact your sleep in terms of everything else, in terms of like, consistency. But the thing is that the alternative is, if you're just making yourself available because that's what you think you should do, I don't think that's going to serve you well. It's like, you got to put some boundaries in there to be like, all right, I'm going to do this on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and that's it. And I'm going to hold the line. But I'm also going to allocate time between 3 and 5 to like go to the gym or pick up my kid at school and coach their soccer team or whatever that is. I'm also going to sit there and say like, look, I'm taking this time back because I'm doing this at 9:00 at night.
Exactly. I mean, there's so many important things that you're tied into what you're talking about. It's like, it's the self-care piece, but then it's also modeling it for your team, for other people, for the Asia team, whoever it is. Like, I'm working with a client now who's just has this tendency to kind of like take everything over because she's capable and competent, and that's the way she's always operated. But like, she had to take a mandatory leave. It was only 2 days and the weekend, and then it was like all this conflict arose. But then she's like, you know what? They actually kind of advanced on it while I was gone. And then my attitude coming in was like further getting them to think it through on their own, as opposed to me just intervening and solving the problem. And so it's like, it's not only modeling a specific type of behavior, but it's also enabling and delegating and handing things off so it's not on your plate. Because not everything has to be on your plate.
So there's two things there. I heard from another podcast guest who that episode's going to get released before yours. She doesn't use delegate, she uses deputize.
I love it.
Yeah. It was like, oh, wow, because it just like shifts it. And someone's like, hey, Nicole, I'm just going to delegate this to you. But when I'm like, Nicole, I'm deputizing this to you, right?
Yeah.
That makes it seem like you own it and that you can make decisions about this, as opposed to like, you just need to get this done.
Right. It's not offloading.
Right?
It's actually empowering.
It's actually empowering. And I love that. And I've used that with like a bunch of my clients since that conversation. That's why I love these conversations. Like, you never know where you're going to pick up information and great ideas. No one has a monopoly on that. I also think that, one of the things that I just try and tell people is that being fix-it girl doesn't get you promoted. It does not get you. You got to let the milk spill. And it goes against everything that we've been taught growing up, right? That girls are taught growing up, is that, you have to fix it. You got to do this. You got to, like, whether it's like you're going to order lunch for like the lunch meeting, or you're going to be taking notes, or, all that other shit, right? Like, you got to let the milk spill, and you got to let other people like sit there and decide if they're going to like take it up and try and fix what's causing the milk to constantly spill, or if you're going to be fix-it girl, because fix-it girl won't get you promoted.
Oh, absolutely not. Because that shit's never in your job description. You're just doing it just because nobody else is picking up slack. But if you don't do it, somebody's going to have to.
Yeah. So, all right. This has been such a great conversation. Nicole, where can people find you?
Yeah. So I'm not that active on social media anymore. It's just
good for you.
Show, but I am, like you mentioned, on Substack, and my publication is called Layer by Layer, or you can just get to it via my website, blog.nicolelenzen.com. And so my website, my Substack, and then I'm also on LinkedIn. If folks are there, feel free to connect there.
Okay, well, we'll link to all that. But Nicole, we just loved having you on the show. It's been so great. Always great to catch up with you. I mean, we've known each other for like well over 10 years, which is like kind of crazy how time flies and how much things have changed. I want to thank you for coming on the show. This is, again, Going the Distance with Go Long. Go Long is about accountability coaching for those little moments that Nicole and I talked about, when you need that reinforcement on a daily basis to kind of keep you on track so that you could focus on those bigger picture things that you may be working on with someone like Nicole. So with that, remember, it's your life. Go the distance. Go long.